So we're going to be taking a look at how the violence really does start to intensify during these pre-revolution years. And you're taking a look on the screen at North America's first ever political cartoon. And we referenced this during our first video in that it was created by Ben Franklin in 1754 in anticipation of the Albany Conference, which gave us the Albany Plan of Union. So that's to say that this is within the context of the French and Indian War. Now, if you take a look at the snake, each of the initials, is meant to represent a colony. South Carolina, North Carolina, Virginia, Maryland, kind of ink ran a little bit here, but that's a P for Pennsylvania, New Jersey, New York, and then the New England colonies are all lumped together as the head of the snake. Rhode Island, Massachusetts, Connecticut, Delaware. It was pretty clear that if you cut off the head of the snake dies. In this case, New England leading the protests. And the cartoon was revived and really took on more meaning after the Stamp Act was passed. Now, Parliament is going to be asserting their authority, and recall that the Stamp Act has been repealed, but where one law is repealed, where one tax is repealed, here comes another. Now, initially there was jubilation over the repeal of the Stamp Act as bells rang out all over Boston on May 16th, 1766, and that's when the appeal became official. However, the joy was replaced by the next set of laws, both to elicit money from the colonies for defense and to assert the will of Parliament to pass laws that dealt with the colonies. These are, in the aftermath of the Declaratory Act. Now, the Townshend Acts, which is named after the man who passed them, were meant to replace the repealed Stamp Act as well as to crack down on smuggling. This law meant that a new board of inspectors for customs duties would be based in Boston, and a regiment of British regulars would now be based in the city. Now, British soldiers essentially occupied Boston when they were transferred from Halifax, and the Bostonians referred to them as lobsterbacks, while these troops would compete for jobs in the economically depressed city when they were not on duty. Now, Boston was singled out for punishment because of a letter urging all colonials to boycott British goods until all new taxes were repealed. New York is on board immediately, Philadelphia gets on board, and the South never really wanted any part of it. Patriot women also played a large role in ensuring the success of these boycotts by agreeing not to buy British cloth and producing it at home independently. And there were even a few female business owners who signed on as part of these non-importation agreements. So we've got some economic tension, we got physical tension with troops in Boston. And it's all going to come to a head on the evening of March 5th, 1770. Now, a sentry in front of the Custom House was being taunted by a group of men and boys, and they were also pelting them with snowballs, ice, stones, oyster shells. 8 reinforcements came to his aid, and hundreds of colonials converged on the scene. Shots rang out, and 5 were instantly killed. Samuel Adams referred to it as a bloody butchery, and he distributed the engraving that you see, which was actually created by someone else, but Paul Revere reprinted it. He's given credit for it. The following day, John Adams was asked to defend the soldiers and Captain Preston, and he was told that no one else would. Adams immediately accepted because he believed that no man in a free country should be denied the right to trial and counsel. Now, the trials of Captain Preston and his men were actually held separately. Captain Preston was found not guilty. 6 of the soldiers were acquitted, and 2 were found guilty of manslaughter, which means they didn't intend to kill anyone, but their actions resulted in death, and they had their thumbs branded. Now, Adams faced some scorn during and immediately following the trial, but he gained immense respect and prestige in the long run. And he famously stated, "Facts are stubborn things, and whatever may be our wishes, our inclinations, or the dictums of our passions, they cannot alter the state of facts and evidence." And ultimately, The only reason the revolution didn't start after the Boston Massacre was because word arrived that the Townshend Acts had mostly been repealed. Only, the tax on tea remained. So, tempers cool for a little bit until about 2 years later. Now, Rhode Island stirred the pot. This is summer 1772 with what was called the Gaspee Incident. In an effort to continue to stamp out smuggling, 24 British boats were tasked with patrolling the entire Atlantic coast, and this is not an easy task. The Gaspee was one of these boats, and it patrolled the coast of Rhode Island, and, it had a very unpopular captain. Rhode Islanders have a reputation for doing whatever they want. It's not a good scenario. This ship runs aground in June 1772 while chasing down a suspected smuggler. Angry colonials boarded the ship. They shot the commanding officer and destroyed the ship. And this was a coordinated and premeditated attack. And Governor Hutchinson feared that this attitude would make its way to Massachusetts if it was left unchecked. Eventually, the perpetrators were ordered back to England for trial after a commissioner from London is sent to investigate, and this upsets the Americans even more. Now, ultimately, England didn't really do much to react to the event, worrying British officials in the colonies. Now, things are going to calm down ever so slightly following the Gaspee incident, but next spring they heat up once again. Now, the British East India Company was kind of the equivalent of a corporation, and they were in serious financial trouble. They had an excess of tea, and they were on the verge of financial ruin if they couldn't sell it quickly enough. Now, there are a lot of members of Parliament who owned stock in the company, and they didn't want to see it fail. So they voted to allow the East India Company to be the sole distributor of tea to the colonies. Now, this right was supposed to make the tea cheaper for the Americans since it could be shipped directly from the source to the colonies, instead of stopping over in England and dealing with middlemen. The tax on tea that was left over from the Townshend Acts also remained in place, and this is really going to further anger those colonial Americans.